Let me tell you something, brother!
Who are these people?
Notice me, senpai. Notice me.
Don't be rude.
Who are these people?
Yes. Welcome to this episode of Pro Wrestling Talk. I'm Angel Rivera alongside Mrs.Witchy Perfect, and we are here again for 30? Episode 30, I believe it is. Why do I forget how many episodes?
Yes, I think it is 30.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is 30. I'm like, is it 30? I hope so. That's why I just said, yeah, I hope it's 30 because I did. No, let me see. I just want to make sure because I'm pretty sure it is 30, but let's see.
Hey, CBC.
It is 30. It is 30. So I would
Yay, 30 episodes.
It's amazing.
I would play music, but YouTube would take us down.
Thank you for the wishes. Please like, let me give a subscribe, whatever. So we're here. We're here to talk about on the WWE Bad Blood pay-per-view, which is next Saturday. And
I can't wait! I can't wait.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's next Saturday. We'll be previewing that. I'm assuming they won't be adding any more matches. It's a week before the show, and WWE doesn't add as many matches as they used to on pay-per-view. So
Well, and they're not like AEW and get like the boring ones that you don't really care about at this point.
Yeah. So that's why I'm kind of like, yeah. I think they're gonna have. Let me see. 5.
There you go.
And yeah, so there's only 5 matches on the card as of now, and I don't think they're gonna add another one. I mean, there's really at this point no reason for it. It's just 5 matches, and
but I got to see Raw and SmackDown.
Yeah, we'll get to that too, but first I figured that we would start with the big documentary that debuted on Netflix on Wednesday, which is the Vince McMahon or Mr. McMahon documentary. It's 6 episodes. We saw the first one. I'm not able to watch the other ones yet, so hopefully I'll be able to watch them. But for now, I was able to watch the first one, so we'll see. But So of course, right before the documentary comes out, the story comes out that Vince McMahon was desperately trying to buy the rights to this documentary so he can kill it.
Just like Oprah.
Yeah, so he can kill a documentary. And he put out a statement on X, which is the first time he's tweeted on X since he resigned from WWE over a year ago. So like,
right, which I was kind of confused. I'm like, why is he saying this? It's your documentary, Vince. You sat down for it.
He sent out a tweet on X for the
Yes.
first time since he resigned from the TKO or WWE in 2023. So let me read this and then we'll react to it. I don't regret participating in this Netflix documentary. The producers had an opportunity to tell an objective story about my life and the incredible business I built, which were equally filled with excitement, drama, fun, and fair amount of controversy and life lessons. Unfortunately, based on an early partial cut that I've seen, this documentary falls short and takes the predictable path of conflating the Mr. McMahon character, in quotes, with my true self. Vince. The title and the promos alone make that evident. A lot has been misrepresented or left out entirely in effort to leave viewers intentionally confused. The producers use typical editing tricks without the context footage and dated sound bites, etc., to distort the viewer's perception and support a deceptive narrative. In an attempt to further their misleading account, the producers use a lawsuit based on an affair that I ended as evidence I am, in fact, Mr. McMahon. In quotes again. I hope that the viewer will keep an open mind and remember there are two sides to every story. So that's Vince McMahon's statement on the documentary. He's apparently very unhappy with it, even though he sat down for over 100 hours of interviews for this
I mean,
documentary.
I will agree they left a lot out. But it was mostly bad stuff. I mean, they made Vince look like not any like a bad person, but I mean, like, oh well, I lived in a trailer park and I was abused by my stepfather. Next, it's like, come
They didn't
on,
spend much.
Vince.
They didn't spend much time on the earlier part of his life. In a Playboy
Right,
magazine interview in the early 2000s, he alleged that he was abused by his mother. Not like physical abuse, but the other abuse. So he was touched
mental.
there by his mother. No, he was touched in his private parts by his mother.
Okay,
That's what he alleged in a Playboy magazine article from 20 plus years ago.
not his stepfather,
No, his
his
mother.
mother.
Yeah, his stepfather is physically abusive, but I'm talking about his mother. He alleged that in the Playboy magazine interview in 2001. So
Yeah,
that
because I mean, well, the stepfather had to be doing it too because he supposedly had a gay encounter, and the rumor is it was consensual.
I don't know. I do remember. I think it was Scott Hall told the story about how
Mhm.
Vince told him about his first gay encounter, and he was he got he was hitchhiking, and a guy happened to touch him, and apparently he liked it. So, and that was his
Yeah.
first gay encounter. So
Yeah, that's how Goldust came into it
yeah,
because he was flamboyant, or you know, and Dustin's like, why didn't he just say gay?
yeah, he didn't say gay. Instead, he just said, "Well, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
androgynous." It's like he was trying to confuse him. I guess
Androgynous, yeah.
that's the word he used. So let's see. Yeah, so the documentary starts with the usual. He grew up in a trailer park in South Carolina, and he's a self-made billionaire. Because he didn't grow up rich, even though his father was rich. He didn't meet him until he was 13 or whatever. But
Yeah, he was
but yeah,
12.
yeah. So so he definitely grew up in a trailer park in South Carolina. It isn't like
Right.
he grew up rich and privileged, because he really didn't. But
For 12
but
years, and then it kind of like, oh, by the way, here's your father. Well, I mean, what? And I believe Jim Cornette was talking about this. He was like, well, okay, so they didn't go into any detail of how, his mother met his father, or why they broke up, or like how the stepfather came into it.
yeah,
They
that.
didn't talk about anything like that. They just
Hmm.
said he was in a trailer park, his stepfather was abusive, and yada yada. That's enough. Okay, thanks. You just left out a whole big part of why, Vince was Vince McMahon. And then, you had Linda, who's looking better than ever, younger every day. That she's sitting there going, yeah, I met Vince when I was 13 and he was 16.
Which is, I've
Okay,
heard that
and did
before.
he?
Yeah.
But like, she never knew about his time. I guess she never knew about him personally.
According to Vince, his mother introduced him to Linda in the church choir. That's where they met.
Yeah.
So that was another interview that Vince did. It wasn't really in this documentary, but yeah.
But when they first sat down, you had literally not only Bret Hart, but like Hogan saying, yeah, I don't know. No one knows the real Vince McMahon. Well, that's true because Vince doesn't
Yeah.
let anybody close to him, not even his own family.
Yeah, and then you can chalk that up to the abuse he suffered as a boy, from both of his parents apparently. So he's afraid to let people in, or else then I mean, they might betray him or abuse him too. So he's still that deep down inside, he's still that 12-year-old little boy, that he never grew up past that age. It's obvious based on behavior, but.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, I don't want to get into psychological stuff, but I think a group of psychologists would have a hard time diagnosing Vince McMahon because you can say he's psychotic, you can say he's megalomaniac, you can say he's at times a sociopath. I mean, there's so many different conditions that you can throw on him that psychiatrists and psychologists wouldn't agree on it. So it's like,
No, they would probably spend about 2 or 3 hours debating what is
yeah,
truly wrong with him. And here it is. He was traumatized when he was young and he doesn't want to talk about it, even though, it's been, how many
decades,
years now, and he just doesn't
decades.
talk about it.
Yeah, and so they went on. Eventually, they went on to his relationship with his dad, and Vince talked about his dad never said he loved them, and they never
Right.
hugged.
They never
At
hugged.
one point, the first time he met him, tried to hug him, and Vince Senior, all he did was kind of like that. He didn't even embrace his son.
Right.
So eventually, he ended up getting a job in the WWF. But the only reason why that happened is because the play-by-play guy kept asking for more money from Vince Senior,
Right.
and eventually
Right.
Vince Senior was like, "What are you going to do, that?" It's like, "Well, Vinny, looks like you're the play-by-play guy. Go out there."
And Jim Cornette said during his review, he said, oh, he hated that name. But like Freddie Blassie would call him Vinny because, I mean, that's what they did. Like they called him that because, I mean, that's how they treated him. And he doesn't even like the junior part because technically
No,
he's not a junior.
no, that's the one
He's
thing.
Vincent Kennedy and his dad was Vincent something.
Vincent James McMahon.
James, yeah, I think something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, everybody, I think they started calling him Junior because they have the same first and last name, even though technically they're
Right.
not Junior. And he hates Junior. Don't, I mean, he even says in the documentary, I think.
He's like, I hate that. And I hate pro wrestling. I hate that word pro wrestling.
To this day,
Vince,
he
that's what
admits
it
it.
is. That's what it is.
It's like he's stuck in that, like, because back in the territory days, it was pro wrestling, like the only people who
Wrestling.
watched pro wrestling was the guys that smoke cigars and drink beer and wanted blood and violence. And I was like, no, we got to bring it into the mainstream. That's what I want to do. I knew I could do that if my dad would just give me or sell me the business. So he had this vision of wrestling. Basically, it's the Walt Disney of wrestling. That's what he wanted to be.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which it wasn't said in the documentary, but that's what other people in the business have said about
Well,
him.
no,
Like,
and they left out a big part of the thing that he got all those promoters together and said, I want to buy your businesses. And basically, there was
it
a
was
couple of territories, like Ole Anderson's, that literally said, fuck you, Vince. Go fuck
Oh yeah,
yourself.
I know that
And
story.
literally, go ahead.
Vince went to the NWA meeting with all the promoters with Jim Barnett because
Yeah.
there's a whole other drama with Jim Barnett and Ole. Ole screwed over Barnett. So Barnett went to work for Vince, and they all went to the NWA meeting like, I'll buy you all out, and they all basically said no, all the promoters. So I was like, okay. good luck. I'm going to compete against all of you. He walked out.
Right. And he said, well, he rolled up them sleeves and said, well, if they're not going to give me their businesses, I'll just buy out their talent. I had to tell my boss the story of that Jim Cornette talked about on his show, where they showed up as a party. Vince and Linda showed up at a party with Ole Anderson. He said, hi, Ole, this is my wife, Linda. He said, fuck you and fuck her too.
Yeah, that's great. That was when
Ole Anderson did not like Vince McMahon. Period. He did.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that was when he bought out his Georgia Championship Wrestling, the time slot, and Vince wanted to hire Ole, give him a job. Instead Ole was like, "Fuck you," and then he like, "Oh, let me introduce him to my wife. Maybe he'll be more amenable to get to take a job
and
then."
Fuck her too.
And no, it didn't work. I don't think Vince realized who Ole Anderson was. It's like, oh, he'll take a job like anybody else. He needs money, so, but no. Eventually, he opened up another promotion and started promoting there, and he ended up with WCW, and he went from there. But he never worked for Vince McMahon. It's one of the few guys, a prominent wrestler, that never worked for Vince.
Well, he ended up not liking Eric Bischoff either, because Bischoff fired him. There's a story that Ole was on he was doing some kind of sideshow or something. He was doing a show because his son was coming into wrestling, and he wanted to do promos for his son to get his son into the business and stuff. And
it was a Smoky Mountain for Jim Cornette.
Yeah.
That was because WCW had fired him because he was in the power plant, but they fired him. So it was like,
right.
Okay. And Jim Cornette called him and was like, "Hey, your son available?" Was, "Oh yeah, of course. I mean, can you come up and do promos with him?" It's like, "Oh, absolutely. Come up to the power plant." It's like, okay. I mean, it's like, I'm not a part of WCW, so it's
he wasn't.
Jim Cornette was gone by that point, so it's like,
he
didn't give a shit. Oh, come up to the power plant.
Come up to the
We'll do
like,
the promos
I'm on lunch
there
right now. Couldn't even talk to because I mean,
Bischoff.
Eric Bischoff comes in
He
this
just happened to
sports car and stuff. He thinks he's king shit. He goes in, he sees Ole, he's like, oh shit.
Ole,
he sees Jim Cornette, and him and Jim Cornette didn't get along.
Yeah.
And he says, Ole, come here. What the hell is he doing here?
Oh, what? I mean, he's hiring my son for a job. Remember the one you fired? So I cut a promo with him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, I'm on my lunch, and we're doing it out in the parking lot. He didn't care. He fired Ole like the next day.
Eric Bischoff told Ole, like, "What's up, Eric? I mean, what's going on? What are we doing here?" It's like, "Oh, I don't like you going out hanging out with Jim Cornette." It's like, "Well, he's hiring my son. He's giving me a job."
Right.
Well, I don't like you doing that. And basically that was it. He walked away, and next day he fired him over the phone.
Yes.
It's like he wasn't man enough to fire Ole Anderson right then and there.
My God. And I think Jim Cornette said he put a booger on Bischoff's car.
Well, he was outside, and they happened to go inside to talk, and that's when you're like, "Oh, I got a big
really nasty booger." There you go.
And he just smeared all over his car, his windshield.
Oh my goodness gracious! He really did not like Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette did not like him.
No.
So they left some of that stuff out. Another thing they left out, which I think they could have gone into, detail with, is the fact that Vern Gagne had a spot that Vince literally, they bribed the guy. They're like, why aren't you gonna show our, why are you sending our tapes back? And they're like, well, Vince gave us more money. And they're like, well, we'll give you double. Just put the tapes on. You just put our stuff on. And then the time comes and their stuff doesn't come on, and they called him like, dude, we just gave you double. And he's like, well, Vince tripled it.
Sorry.
So we just put on Vince's stuff.
The context of that is they were doing the Pro Wrestling USA thing, which was it was AWA and a few other promotions came together to do the Pro Wrestling USA thing, and they were promoting a show out in San Francisco. So they had negotiated. Initially, they would just barter the time, but Vince started offering money. He's like, I'll give you $2,000 a week. And then eventually, okay, $2,500, put our stuff on. Then he called back. Oh, Vince offered $3,000. He's like, oh no, $3,500. That's it, right? We're done here, right? I mean, you're not going to talk to Vince anymore. Oh, no, of course, you're in, Vince is out. and they got to never talk to each other again. They like, what happened to our shit? Never aired in San Francisco. They were promoting shows, live events, and then got the tapes back, and they called him. It was like, oh, Vince offered $5,000 a week to put his show on, and never called Jim again.
It was so horrible, so
Yeah, this is
horrible. I
the
felt
type of
bad
stuff
for
that
them.
Vince did. This type of shit Vince did. Yeah, he would
I
just
actually had to tell that story too to my boss. I said, "Why did they leave that out? That's significant of him doing business and how he took out the territories." They did mention that yes, he did buy up the talent, but the thing is, he was giving money out like a drunken sailor, literally like Eric Bischoff would do much later, and I had to explain that to my boss.
and Vince would proceed to complain about this in the mid
Right,
'90s.
right.
Ironically, Eric Bischoff did the same thing he did to all the promoters. So, but he would
And
complain
that's
about it
right.
in the
When
mid
Hogan came
'90s.
on, I said, and he said, well, it just, was cool for me just to, go up with the, Vince McMahon. I'm like, oh, so you did the same thing to Vince that you did to Vern, you fucker. And I say this
Yeah,
on my new episode, which will be coming out in What's Up, guys. I watched the
yeah. I
sixth
watched.
part of, oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what we're
Yeah,
talking about. We're talking about the
we're
first episode.
yeah we're doing the first episode tonight. Thank you for joining us. But go ahead,
Yes,
finish
and
up.
please hit that like button, Dave. Please, 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 please. So like literally when Hogan comes on, yeah, I had to go to Vince, I had to think of myself. Well, you've always thought of yourself. And I said on my new episode, which is
That
coming out at the end of October, Hogan was for Hogan. He didn't give a fuck about anybody else. Hogan was for Hogan because he did the same thing to Vern Gagne the same thing that he did to Vern Gagne, he did to Vince McMahon, eventually Eric Bischoff.
and he
So
went.
how does
Yeah,
it feel, Vince?
yeah. So then
What
talking
goes
about
around comes
Hogan.
around.
Hogan started off with he went to New York WWF. I called it New
Yeah,
York. It's an old school thing, but
WWF.
yeah, he went to New York in the 1970s,
Right.
and he was a heel, and he was called
Yep.
something. I forget what the name was right now.
Yeah, my boss couldn't think of it either. Something golden.
Yeah, Golden something, but yeah. Anyways, Vince Senior gave him. Oh, thank you,
Oh,
appreciate the
thank you,
like.
Dave.
But yeah, Vince Senior, like you're not gonna be Golden, whatever. You're gonna be Hulk Hogan because he liked the name Hogan because he's Irish, and a Hulk because look at him, he was like 340 pounds. He was
Oh
a
yeah.
giant then. So Hulk Hogan, that's how he got his name. But he was a heel then. He worked with Andre up and down in the 70s. It was like
Right.
then he did the Shea Stadium shows with Andre, and he slammed Andre multiple times. I mean,
multiple times.
and Vince and Hogan act like, oh, the first time I slammed Andre was in 1987 at WrestleMania 3, which it wasn't.
So then
Like,
why
Hogan's
did you
just a
lie and
liar.
say that WrestleMania 3 was the first time Andre has ever been slammed? Because you lie and you
Yeah.
can't keep up with your own lies, Hogan.
It's like he
I had to
forgot that he worked
explain
with Andre in the
right.
70s.
I had to explain the story that they left out, how Hogan screwed Vern Gagne. I
Yeah,
had to tell that to my boss because again they left it out.
he
I
left
was
it
like,
out.
he did fuck over Vern Gagne when they thought Eddie Graham was ribbing him, and it turns out
Mhm.
Hawk really left. And they were
Yeah.
sold out. I said everywhere in Minnesota, they were sold out. Hogan literally fucked them over. I mean,
Yeah,
screwed them.
because and Hulk, and the story was he was working with Bockwinkel for the AWA World Title, but
Yes.
they kept never putting the belt on him because they would always do some type of dusty finish where Hogan would win, but then it turns out, oh, he threw Bockwinkel over the top rope, so that's against the commission
Right.
rules, so we're reversing the decision and keeping the belt on Bockwinkel, blah,
Right.
blah, blah. Eventually, he planned to put the belt on him like in January or something of 84.
Right. And Greg
but-
says Vern always kept things close to the chest because he was afraid that this would get leaked to the dirt sheets and then everybody would know.
Yeah, which makes sense, but he never told Hulk. So it was
No.
like, and he's like, okay, well, that's when apparently they went to Japan, him and Andre, and it's like, hey, Vince Jr., he's doing this big national expansion and blah, 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 and you're going to make a lot of money with Vince Jr., and
Right.
and it's like, because context, because go back a little bit, Vince Sr. fired Hogan because he did Rocky 3.
Right. Which he told him not to do.
Yeah. So he did it anyways, and Vince Sr. fired him and said he'll never work here in New York again. So,
Vince because Vince Jr. said, "Go, Hawk, go do it."
Yeah, so
go do it.
because Vince, he'll never work here again, So it was
Yeah.
one of those things, and then now he would, if you in '83 or whenever, and that was '83 because Hogan became champion in January of '84, so it was in '83. Vince literally flew to Japan to sign Hogan to make the deal with Hogan,
Right. And what
and that.
happened was, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, and then they would come back, and that's when Vince would send a telegram to Vern saying like, "I quit." No,
Hogan.
no name, no nothing. And then it came
Yeah,
from
he didn't
Florida.
sign it. I told my
Yeah,
boss, I said, he sign it, Terry. I mean, I said he didn't even have the balls to go up to Vern and say, hey, Vern, Vince is paying me a lot of money. I can't be here anymore. He didn't even have the balls to do that. He signed it. He didn't even sign a telegram. I
yeah.
mean, literally, Vern Gagne thought that Eddie Graham was
Is Eddie
fucking with
Graham?
him.
Yeah. It was like, oh, that's in Florida. That's fucking Eddie Graham ripping me. So it was like,
Yeah, so
and he
they
ignored it.
ripped it up and tossed it in a trash can, and then they had sold out
Everything. Yeah,
Minneapolis and everything, St. Paul, everything
they were
around Christmas
doing.
time because it was going to be Andre and Hogan, and
Yeah.
Hogan didn't show up. They called Hawk, said, Hawk, why aren't you here? Where are you? And he
Is that,
said, didn't you guys get my telegram? And they're like,
mhm.
they thought that was a fucking rib, dude.
Why didn't you sign it? It's like, look, if you're gonna leave, at least do these towns for us. Come work
Yeah,
these events. We're sold out. And
right.
it's like, oh well, I'm not coming back. So,
Yeah,
and he
Vince
ended
is
up
paying me
joining.
more to sit here.
hmm So yeah, the reason why Hogan said that because he didn't get the AWA World Title. If he would have gotten it, maybe he would have stayed. But yeah,
And I
that's
agree that Vern is not 100%, innocent in this. He should have at least told Hawk. He
yeah.
should have told
He should
Hogan
have
that, hey, I'm
before he
going to
went
make
to
you champ.
Japan. Yeah,
Yeah, I'm going to make
because
you
he.
champ. So just, come back from Japan and be rested. I
I
don't
don't
know.
think. I don't think he suspected that Vince would go after Hulk because especially how Hulk left in at the first time. So
Yeah, I
and
don't know.
another thing we learned from the documentary is apparently Vince initially wanted Dusty Rhodes to be his top guy because he loved Dusty.
Yeah, they didn't really elaborate on that. It was just Cody kind of
Yeah,
saying, yeah, Dusty didn't really think of anything
yeah,
about it. He didn't really feel it or believe it. I mean, I can see the thing is Dusty, and they explained this during the Jim Cornette review. Dusty had
hmm
other stuff. He had other irons in the fire, so to speak. So, but they did do that. What if, in like
yeah,
90 or 93, what would have happened if in like 83 before Dusty
yeah.
had all this other stuff? He was going to go to Florida. He was going to book. He was going to do
Uh-huh.
this and that. What would have happened in 83 if Dusty was the guy? And they seem to think Dusty wouldn't have been as big as Hogan. I disagree.
No.
He was already big.
Yeah.
Now you put him on a national stage, and guess what? Everybody falls in love with the American
Yeah.
Dream, Dusty Rhodes.
Yeah.
He had that
Because
charisma. He could put asses in seats.
because it had Vince Jr. saw it when Dusty came in '77 and had the match with
Right.
Superstar for the
Yep.
world title, and he
Yep.
saw it. He was on. He saw it. He's like, "Wow, Dusty is over here in New York, and he's this Southern guy, and he's fat, he's not like he's not like Superstar Billy Graham, when he had like
Right.
he's in shape and stuff. He still got over here in New York, huh?"
Mm-hmm.
Because Vince was planning a national expansion for years, even back in
Right.
'77. So he's like, if I get my hands on my dad's business, I know I can expand it. And I know we could do this. But
Right.
it's like, so he's like, Dusty definitely could be my guy. So, but according to Cody, Dusty didn't see it. He's like, going national. That's crazy. I'm not.
Well,
I'm
the thing is,
like,
I think that Dusty had irons in the fire there, and he was already going to go to Florida. He was going to go booking, and for Florida, and
hmm
I just think that Dusty had a lot of other things on his mind. He. It's not that he wouldn't have gone national. I mean, if he would have, if he had seen what Vince saw, I'm
yeah,
sure Vince could have convinced him, hey, I can give you a wonderful salary. I can give you this and that, and
yeah,
merchandise and sell, and that kind of thing. I think he could have talked Dusty into it if Dusty didn't have those other irons in the fire, like going to
yeah,
Florida to book,
Florida. Uh-huh.
because he was
Yeah,
known in those Southern territories as a great man, a great wrestler, and a great booker. So, I
yeah,
mean, he
but
literally had, the whole kit and
yeah.
caboodle. He just didn't want it with Vince.
he didn't see. Cody's like he didn't see what Vince's vision was, and even if he did, I don't know where he had done it because he's like a
Right.
territory traditional guy. So
Right.
even if he saw it and he's like could work, but it's like I don't want to because he had to respect a lot of the promoters and he was a booker
Right.
too down there. So it was
Right.
like
And
so
he knew the
even
business. He could book.
yeah
He was a great booker.
yeah
I'm gonna take off my camera for just a minute,
okay
but you'll hear me, okay?
okay
Okay.
yeah. So Vince was considering Dusty as his guy
Yeah, but they
initially.
didn't go too much into it. I don't
Yeah.
like that. You know,
Yeah, they
they
should have
kind
gone
of
in.
just brushed the surface.
Yeah, Vince should have expanded on that more and asked him about that. It's like, did you seriously consider Dusty first instead of Hogan? Because that would have been a big revelation, Because I always heard rumors that Vince liked Dusty, and if Hogan wasn't available, Dusty would have been his guy. But
Right.
but I
But they
never
just kind of
Vince.
like glossed over it. Oh, well, he didn't see the vision. Well, why don't you mention that he also was booking in Florida? He
Mhm.
was also doing all these things. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
He was
sorry.
also doing, 10 other things other than, I mean, like I said, I think Vince could have talked Dusty into it. What I don't know is, I mean, would Dusty eventually go for it? He might. I mean,
Yeah, he
Vince could
might
talk
have.
him into it.
Mm.
But I mean, when you're doing like 50 million things at once, it's kind of like, I can't go with another project right now.
Yeah,
I have 3
especially
shows. Do I want 5?
yeah.
No, I don't.
Vin,
Not right now.
Vince, yeah, Vince. I don't know how hard Vince pursued Dusty. It might have been one of those things that he talked to Dusty about it in '83, because at that time Dusty would be almost going to Jim Crockett because he ended
Yeah.
up being there
Yep.
in '84, '85. So he would have ended up there eventually.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah,
he
he
was
was.
wrestling, booking,
Yeah,
and he was sort of like in the behind the scenes too. So again, when you have all these irons in the fire, I mean, it's kind of hard to take on new work. You know what I
yeah.
mean?
I
He would
think
have to
Dusty
give that
liked.
up, and I think Dusty loved it too much.
Yeah, Dusty loved to book and create these stories and stuff. He wouldn't do that with Vince because that was all Vince and he booked everything.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so he would just be the champion and travel the country, which he could have got. I think he could have gotten over as big as Hogan did. So
Oh, even more.
yeah,
Yeah,
because
see, the thing is, Dusty could talk you into the building, even if his wrestling was, it
mm,
was good. But I still think, I mean, because Dusty, if you watch some of those promos, especially like the Hard Times promo,
yeah,
oh my gosh, I'm like, yes, yes,
mhm.
Dusty.
yeah,
But I absolutely agree. I think he could have been bigger than Hogan.
yeah. That's a big what if, and Vince McMahon kind of admitting that he thought like Dusty, he thought of Dusty first, and I was like, oh
Hmm.
wow. I mean, finally hear it from the horse's mouth, and I've heard that rumor for
Hmm.
years, but. I didn't think Vince would consider it because he's always into like the big muscle, big body guys. So to him to consider Dusty is like,
Yeah, that was another one I kind of questioned. But then when I heard Jim Cornette say, "Well, Dusty was kind of doing this and doing that," so he had several projects he was doing. So I was just like, "Well, then I
he
would kind of
wasn't.
say, Vince, I already got this other stuff that I like to do." Because he would just be wrestling, he wouldn't be booking. So
No, he wouldn't
I
be
think
booking. He's just a wrestler.
right. I think he just kind of was like, well, I would, Vince, but I kind of have these other irons in the fire. So, but thank you for thinking of me, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
But
and
again,
then
they glossed it over, and I didn't like that. They only
yeah,
had Cody going, oh, he didn't believe in it. That's because
yeah,
he literally couldn't just wrestle. He wanted to be Booker. He wanted to be this. He wanted to be that.
yeah. So yeah, but that's another revelation, which surprised me. It turns out that Vince Senior was considering getting out of the business in the early '80s, and he didn't think of his son. He thought he was going to sell the company to Gorilla Monsoon was supposed to take over.
Right, right, right. The other thing that they kind of didn't talk about was the fact that, I mean, they didn't elaborate on it. They did mention it. His father
Yeah,
did not like him buying up those territories. He didn't want
no,
him to expand.
no,
He
not
was just
initially.
happy with the little bit of land that they had and a little bit of, and as you were talking about when they were going to sell it to, because I mean, they said on Jim Cornette, I mean, Gorilla was their guy. That was the heir to the
Yeah,
throne.
yeah, it was
That's who
Gorilla.
they were going to give it to.
David, there's only 6 episodes, and they're already up on Netflix. I
Yep.
don't see any other episodes, especially since Vince never finished the documentary after the
With the
Janelle Grant thing
allegations. Yeah, with the
came out. Yeah,
allegations.
he never came back for the interviews to finish up. So I
Yeah,
don't
his
think we'll see
PR
any more
called them and
episodes.
said, "Sorry, we're not doing any more interviews. Have a nice day."
So they had to splice together a documentary off what they had. So it was like, but
Yeah.
it's supposed to be Gorilla Monsoon who took over, not Vince Jr. So it was
Right.
like,
Like I said, as Jim said, Jim Cornette. Um, oh man, I'm so sorry. Sinuses. Um, yeah, Gorilla was supposed to be the heir to that throne, and
mm-hmm.
boy, I'll tell you what, that didn't happen. But Vince said, "Wait, Dad, give me a chance. Let's do a contract that if I can pay you such amount of money." Now remember, he was running the I think it was like in Vermont or whatever,
Yeah,
one of
he was
those coliseums
promoting.
in
He
there.
was promoting
Yeah,
small towns for Vince for his dad. Yeah, he was.
right. So he was doing that northeastern stuff and generating money, and he said, "I'll pay you X amount of money in some payments,
Yeah,
and then if I can pay all these payments, I get the company. But if I miss one payment, one little payment, then
yeah,
give it to Gorilla Monsoon."
yeah. He would
And
give
he
it.
said no one expected him to pay that off. But I mean, they were
No,
generating so much revenue in Vermont.
yeah, yeah. So it was like Vince and his Vince Gorilla and all his partners. Vince Senior is like, he ain't gonna make it, so I'll just get the company
Hmm.
back and then just hand it over to Gorilla as we planned. So it's not a big deal. So turns out that he did make that final payment, and they're all like, "Holy shit!" I mean,
Holy
maybe
shit.
Vinny Junior may have something to him here, you know?
Yeah. Well, and then like I kind of wondered, like they didn't say, "Oh, but Gorilla still got a position for life with the
Yeah,
WWF, even though he was sort of the heir to the throne, but didn't get
yeah.
it."
So
Man, sorry.
eventually, the deal between Vince and Gorilla was he gave him his shares in exchange. He
Hmm.
got the job for life, basically. So he had to.
Yes.
So Gorilla worked for WWF until he passed. I think what 97, 98, something like that when he passed. But yeah,
99, I think.
okay, well, yeah. So he worked in various roles as a play-by-play guy. Eventually, he
Oh, he was so
became.
great. I loved him as a baby face. He was so
Yeah,
great. I love him on prime time. Him and Bobby
mhm.
Heenan were literally
Yeah, they were
TV
great.
soulmates.
Yeah,
Like they could bounce off of each other. Him and Lord Alfred Hayes were good.
hmm,
Him and Jesse were great. That's the other
yeah,
thing they didn't talk about. They didn't talk about the whole Jesse Ventura thing. But they will. I think they'll go a little bit into it on the second episode. So
yeah.
stay
So
tuned.
yeah, they'll get to that. I mean, because I have some clips that I've saved on X, which I'm going to play on Rumble, and
Okay.
they talk about how Vince basically admits that, oh yeah, Jesse spouted off in some union thing, but Hulk told me, and
Yeah,
we
Hulk
quashed
came
that
right to
shit
me.
quickly.
He made a beeline for Vince.
Nah.
So when they get into so they talk about, how
Hmm.
the territory was growing with Hogan, and they brought in some expert talent. So, Nikolai Volkov, because you could still hate the Russians. It was the
Yeah.
80s. So Nikolai Volkov, Boris Zukov, also the Iron Sheik, who actually was
Hmm.
Iranian.
Yeah, he was
Um,
legit.
yeah, he
He's a
was
part of
legit.
the Iranian National Guard, and he's legit. You know, he's a Roman Greco amateur wrestler. He was great. You know, he won
Yeah.
gold medals and stayed medaled at least in the Olympics. So he's legit. You know, he's like,
Right. So that was their top heel,
mm-hmm.
even though they had a heel against Hogan, but they kind of wanted to exploit that Iran Contra thing.
Yeah,
So around that time, the Iran Contra deal was going on. And Vince sort of exploited that because, I mean, like literally, I mean, the heat that the Iranian Sheik, the Iron Sheik, excuse me,
yeah,
the Iron Sheik was getting great heat, almost as bad as Slaughter.
yeah.
Um,
So the story behind that was Bob Backlund was the WWF champion. He had the belt for
right.
nearly 6 years at that by 1983.
Right, and
So
not Vince, Jim said that Bob Backlund, man, he was Vince Senior's guy. That was
yes,
his guy. But
yeah,
Hogan was Vince Junior's guy,
mm-hmm.
or Vincent Kennedy McMahon.
Yeah,
So Vince's man was Hogan, and that's
yeah,
why he took it off Bob Backlund, because Bob Backlund was his father's guy,
yeah.
and
So
he wasn't doing the whole, a great the boy next door, or the
yeah, it was
all-American
the All
boy from
American Boy.
Minnesota, or whatever.
Because Vince Senior won an All American Boy as champion because he had the
Yes.
ethnic champions Bruno and Pedro Morales and all
Yep.
the and he had the superstar Billy Graham. He had like the
Yep.
ethnic champions. And there's a funny story about Pedro Morales. I mean, the reason why Pedro Morales was champion for 3 years because Vince Sr. was afraid of how Puerto Ricans would react if he ever lost the belt. So, like, he was afraid how the Puerto Ricans would react because he thought,
Okay.
well, Puerto Ricans have knives and they shiv people, and he had like this thought
I
about Puerto
mean,
Ricans.
right, the Puerto Rico territory was, I mean, when they start
Yeah,
throwing batteries at you, I
uh
think
huh.
you got enough heat there, dearie.
So I'm sure Vince Sr. knew about the Puerto Rican territory, and he had a Puerto
Right.
Rican champion. It's like, oh shit, I can't take this
Ah,
belt off of him.
cover your head.
I
There's batteries flying everywhere.
But yeah, that was a side note. But they had the ethnic champion. So Vince Senior wanted an All American boy, and it's like he looked around the country. He's like, oh, Bob Backlund. You
Bob
know, he's legit.
Backlund.
He's
Right, he's
legit
from
athlete.
Minnesota.
You know, he's from Minnesota. Legit
Uh
athlete, an Olympian too. So yeah,
huh.
let's just put the belt on him. And he, of course, he came over. He was a champion for 6 years. And eventually he dropped it to the Iron Sheik because by
Right.
that point Vince Jr. had the company, and he's like, but they didn't tell the story in the on the documentary. But this is something that I saw online and I heard about in interviews. Bob Backlund tried to get Vince Sr. to convince his son not to, force not to have him drop the belt to Sheik. And Sr. went to Junior, and that's when they had that argument, which I'm sure you heard about, where he's like, Dad, this is my
Mhm.
company, and I'm now, and you work for me. So if you have a problem with what I do, you're gonna have to leave, because we're gonna do this transition to Hogan, because once they did a transition to Hogan, they realized that Bob's never been a champion again, and he wasn't until 1990, what 2 or 3, when he beat Bret Hart at Survivor Series. What was that year when he came back and beat Bret Hart for the title? But I don't remember when. I think I lost Steph again. Are you there? Can you hear me? Well, I guess I lost her, but yeah, I mean, like I was saying, Backlund was the champion. Yeah, she'll be back. Bob Backlund was the champion, and eventually was dropped to the Iron Sheik because, if I remember correctly, Arnie Skolin done threw in the towel when he was in the camel clutch, and Bob Backlund wouldn't quit. So that's how they gave Bob Backlund out because it was Arnie Skolin throwing the towel. Bob Backlund never surrendered. So she's back. Give us a minute.
Sorry.
I mean, we lost you there. I was talking about
This
how
computer
Bob
is not
Backlund
working
dropped the
well.
belt. Yeah, how Bob Backlund dropped the belt because they had the match with the Iron Sheik, and Bob Backlund never surrendered. Instead, his manager Arnie Skolin threw in the towel, which gave Bob an out. It was like, hey, I mean, he never beat me. I mean, my manager threw in the towel, so they gave Backlund an out. The Iron Sheik was the champion for a month, and on January of '84, January 23rd of '84, that's when the Hogan finally won the world title and became the Hulkamania thing. He exploded after that. I mean, fans went nuts when Hulk Hogan won the belt. I said Terry, like, so, yeah, Hogan. So, yeah, Hogan. So Hogan ran wild with that belt. I mean, and Vince Jr. or Vince McMahon decided to like figure out a way how to make his company more mainstream. So throughout that episode, they talk about how eventually Vince saw cable coming because in '84 cable was kind of in its infancy, but he saw it becoming the next big thing. So I'm going to put and that's when the USA Network popped up, and they were interested in airing WWF products. So they ended up airing Superstars of Wrestling. It was some show initially, or Tuesday Night Titans. It was Tuesday Night Titans was like the Tonight Show version that Vince hosted himself. So, yeah, they would do USA Network, TNT, Tuesday Night Titans, and um, they would do the Superstars of Wrestling show, which was basically like superstars. You know, they would have job matches and they would put over the top guys. And Hogan very rarely appeared on those shows, so it was more like to get over other talent. But yeah, eventually, this is when in 84, 85, the Rock and Wrestling Connection happened with MTV. Uh, Vince McMahon, Vince McMahon was, you know, wanting to make his company more mainstream, so he saw MTV, and Cyndi Lauper was really big in 84, 85. So hopefully my co-host can stay now. Tony Bananas, I didn't realize how far back the USA Network and WWE went. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
they're back in the 80s. You know, they, like I said, I was telling the audience before you were able to come back. They did Superstars of Wrestling, which would eventually become Superstars, which
Right.
was the show, you know, they would do it in syndication. But
Mhm.
and Tuesday Night Titans, which was a Tonight Show parody that Vince hosts himself. You remember that show?
Mhm.
Which and I was just running through the episode there, but um yeah, eventually, um all right, so WrestleMania 1. Now Vince, you know, gets into this a lot. They get into this a lot because he was on vacation. He took one vacation in 1983. No, 80. It was 80 late 84 because Vince
Yeah.
was thinking about the Super Show concept. Because he's like, hey, the NFL is Super Bowl. Major League Baseball has the World Series. We need that type of event where everything culminates in that one event. So
Right.
eventually, he was on vacation with Linda, and he's like, we need that vacation. He's like, show that and
Yeah.
and Linda was like, "Really, we're on vacation, Vince. I mean, what are you talking about business for?" By the way, Vince never took another vacation again. That was like a one time thing in '84, you know,
Well, and here's the
and he never did it
kicker.
again.
Right, here's the kicker. Jim Cornette, they said, what a crock of shit." They didn't. They had the idea of WrestleMania, but the name WrestleMania did not come out until Howard Finkel is the one. He was like
Yeah,
Beatlemania, Hulkamania,
yeah, wrestling.
WrestleMania. Yeah, so it was actually
And
like Howard Finkel.
Vince took credit for it. It's like, oh well, he came up with
Mm-hmm.
WrestleMania and on vacation before, like in December of '84,
Right.
and he took credit for that. But that's been attributed to Howard Finkel. Everybody talked about how Finkel came up with that. It wasn't Vince, because I don't even know whether Vince knew about. And I assume he knew about the Beatles. He had to,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, he didn't. You know, that was Howard Finkel. Everybody says that around Vince. So he's like, oh, well, I came up with that, pal, while on vacation. You know, WrestleMania. And also, they didn't touch on Black Saturday. They didn't touch on the fact
Mm-hmm.
that Jim
Nope.
Crockett Jr. gave $1 million to Vince, and Vince used that money, part of that money, to finance the first WrestleMania. But
Right.
he also talked about how he mortgaged everything, like his whatever he had, it was mortgaged in order
Mm-hmm.
to pull out that money during the first WrestleMania. And I'm surprised that Linda let him do that. I mean, that's a big risk to take. At the time, Shane was born, and I'm not sure. Yeah, Stephanie would be born too. So they both children would be born by then, in 85.
Mm-hmm.
So it made
Yep.
no sense for, like, it's a big risk. I mean, if it failed, I mean, they were done. The World Wrestling Federation would be done, and
Right. Absolutely.
Vince would have to file for bankruptcy again. So
Right. And see, the thing is, like, I just don't know it. Like, I mean, it was if it they got all see what they did was around the first WrestleMania they had that rockin' wrestling because Cyndi Lauper, who was a big wrestling
yeah,
fan, she had Lou Albino on her
yep.
uh Captain
I
Lou
forgot to
Albino in
mention, yeah, I mentioned
yeah.
Lauper, but I forgot about the music video.
Yeah, so he was in Girls Just Want to Have Fun, but
Yeah,
also if you watch, several wrestlers are in the Goonies theme. If you ever saw the music video
yeah,
for the Goonies theme, there's Piper, there's Albino, there's several other ones too that are like sneaking around and stuff. Because Cyndi Lauper loved wrestling; she was a big wrestling fan, and
yeah,
I know in Piper's documentary, excuse me, that he talked about how he didn't want to do it, but I mean, he thought it was so much fun that he got to slap around Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, they did. I forgot to mention this, but that big Hogan Piper match in '84 ish that was done on MTV. The War to Settle the Score.
Yep.
That was done on MTV and drew a big rating. I mean, of course, this drama, Piper didn't want to put Hogan over by clean, so it was they were fighting to do a finish, and eventually they came up with the count out where Piper could count out and Hogan would win that way because Piper didn't want to put Hogan over. And
Right.
Hogan, not in this documentary, but in other ones and other interviews, lie and say, "Well, I wanted to drop the belt to Piper, but I didn't think he would drop it back to me," which he wouldn't have. But there's no way Hogan wanted to drop the belt to Piper within a year of his beginning of his title run. That wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So he just lied there again. But I didn't think Piper would drop it back to me, so we didn't do it. It's like he wouldn't have dropped it back to you. Let's be clear about that. But there's no way you want to drop it to him. That's a lie. And even if that's true, there's no way Vince would allow it. I mean, Hogan was his golden goose. It was like he was the golden guy. So dropping the belt less than a year after he got his championship was not going to happen. So because Piper wouldn't drop it back, Hogan didn't want to drop it to Piper because I'm pretty sure he lied about that, and Vince wouldn't let him, even if Hogan wanted to and Piper agreed to it. I mean,
oh yeah, absolutely. And the fact that they, well, they talked about Wendy Richter and well, they briefly talked about Wendy Richter, and showed her, pumping up and stuff. And, she's, the women's champion and stuff. And she's going to, represent Cyndi Lauper, who wasn't a wrestler, couldn't wrestle if she tried, but she was a wrestling fan. So, I mean, when they did the WrestleMania 2, so WrestleMania was a big success, more or less. I mean, because they had and then that's when they started getting Mr. T, because Hogan's like, well, excuse me, he was up and coming star. He was everywhere.
Yeah,
so,
he was huge.
Why not be, in Rocky 3, bring back Mr. T, who, was a, big thing in Rocky 3. And I was just like, Hogan, you bastard. You know Mr. why you don't bring actors into this? Because literally actors don't know how to wrestle.
Yeah. So Mr. T popped up and he was a big star. That's why I see why they did that. They put Mr. T in that tag team match. But he was starring in the A-Team. He was A-Team was huge in '85.
Rocky 3.
He's Rocky 3, so he was like a big superstar. So it's like, okay, we're gonna pair Hulk Hogan and Mr. T, a mainstream star, versus Roddy Piper and Paul Orndorff. Because Paul Orndorff turned on Hogan, right, or was that later?
I think that was around the time, because I think it was Piper and wasn't it Piper and Orndorff?
Yeah,
at WrestleMania 2.
Yeah, it was WrestleMania 1 that main event.
1. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and Cowboy Bob was out in the outside, and he interfered in that match, but he accidentally hit. It had to be Paul Orndorff because Piper wouldn't have taken the pinfall. So it had to be Orndorff, and Hogan pinned Orndorff.
Or at least Cowboy Bob Orton.
Yeah, because he was Bob Orton was involved in that match. He wasn't actually in the match. He was outside, but I know Cowboy Bob was involved. I specifically remember him hitting, I think Orndorff.
Yeah, because he had a cast on his arm, right?
Yeah. He had the cast. So he, Hogan pinned Orndorff. They won the match, and that was it. Because they had Muhammad Ali as the special guest enforcer. They had Liberace as special guest timekeeper.
Yes.
They had Billy Martin who's a former Yankee manager as the special guest ring announcer. Yep. They had celebrities all over that ring to lead into that match. So it was
why do you think it was so successful? I want to get your thoughts on why do you think that WrestleMania, the first one, was so successful, and then we can go into the John Stossel and Dr. D.
Oh, that's funny. But why do I think it was successful? It was.
I mean, it was glitz and glamour, but that's my opinion. You go ahead.
Yeah, but it was that. It was the fact that WWF was so hot. They connected themselves to MTV, which was a huge thing.
Yep.
Because MTV was was, not only would they be huge in '85, but they would get
Mm-hmm.
even bigger throughout the '80s and going into the '90s. I mean,
I want my
yeah,
MTV.
I remember those ads. Today,
Oh, you're gonna have
MTV
to
is
cut that. Sorry.
MTV today is just a shell of its former self because now they air
Mm-hmm.
like these trashy reality shows, Teen Mom and Ridiculousness, which is the only show that I would even remotely watch on MTV today. But
Kind
but
of
yeah,
like
going back,
CMT.
yeah, some going back to why I was so successful was success. Vince McMahon is behind a lot of that. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
hyped the shit out of WrestleMania. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was I heard a beep. I don't know, but oh, Alex,
Wasn't me.
ready? Uh, You here already?
Oh,
Yeah.
hey, how about them pirates, eh?
Oh,
Hey, but
I
Guardians
told
just
you.
lost
I
their game,
told
so the
you.
Yankees have the
I
number one seed
told
in the American
you.
League.
I told you.
you know,
If they won, I said if the Pirates won, I would pick on you.
Hey,
I just
hey,
realized we're past 9 o'clock,
all that
and
matters is the Yankees have the number one seed for the American League. That's what
Oh.
matters. So
we're. I said Alex is here already, and I looked. It's 9:01. So I'm
It
like,
is 9:01.
I didn't realize what time it was again. Like last week, where we're supposed to go over the Rumble, but we never did because Alex didn't come, and
no, because remember last week I was mentioning that I was saying I was got a NASCAR race to watch. So I wasn't going to come.
Yeah.
That's right. NASCAR overtook
and we forgot
us.
to flip over to Rumble.
Yeah.
All right.
All right,
Tony
let's flip over
Banana
to Rumble.
says the hype made it successful. Yeah, that's true. They lied about the WrestleMania 3 attendance. That's true.
Yeah, they did.
And they talk about that, I think, in this first episode.
Yeah, so do you want to
You
finish
need
or
to
you want to
pick
go to
on him for
Rumble?
that shirt. Yeah, let's just finish this up real quick.
Okay.
So they did WrestleMania, was successful. Oh, by the way, go to Rumble, everyone. Here, that's the link to the Rumble. So
Yeah, so get ready to go over to Rumble.
but we're gonna finish this up real quick. So the
John Stossel and the Dr.
yes.
D stuff. Now
Yeah.
I had to explain to my boss basically that Dr. D says that Vince told him to do this. Vince told him to go out there and slap this guy and show him how real wrestling is. But it's kind of funny because Jim Cornette and Brian Last were making fun of Hogan when Hogan's like, "Yeah, I just made a beeline for Vince, and I just told him this guy's, he's trying to expose the business."
Hogan always involves himself in everything, even though he had nothing to do with it. Because I've heard multiple versions of that story, and Hogan is not even mentioned. So
not even mentioned.
And somehow Hogan he went to Vince and said and like he involved himself. It was my idea, to have John Stossel be taught a lesson, which was not true. According to David Schultz, Dr. D, he went like no, Vince told me personally that you need to teach David Stossel. What's his name? John Stossel. I'm sorry.
John Stossel, not
a
David.
lesson. But according to according to Vince, at least, it was like no, not according to Vince, but other people in that documentary. Vince walked into the locker room and said, "Damn, I wish somebody would teach John Stossel a lesson. He's exposing the business. He's he's doing this, that, and the third." So Vince actually walked in to the dressing room and said that,
and I
then
said,
walked
"This
out.
is like that. Will no one rid me of this meddlesome priest?" Which was from, I believe, Richard III. I don't know what act. Don't ask me what act it was from. But yeah, it's like literally saying, "Oh, will no one take care of this guy?" So Dr. D stepped up and said, "Yeah, sure, Vince. I'll go out there and take care of him."
So there's multiple
and then you see him
versions
as
of
like
the story.
And my boss is like, "Oh, he hit him twice." Yeah, he hit him twice.
He's like, and he just barely
think
did that. And
you think this is fake? Huh? Boom. And he goes,
barely
boom.
just touched him. He went down, and then he did it again. It's like, whoop, down again, and he sued. Eventually, in 1990, he was settled a lawsuit with WWF and Vince.
But
and
what
also,
they didn't tell in that process, what they didn't say is that literally, Vince had to fire Dr. D. They didn't mention that. They didn't mention that because Dr. D didn't stay very long after that incident.
No, he was gone.
But Dr. D swears that Vince told him to go out there and hit this guy
Yeah.
and show him what what wrestling's really about. And then he's like, well, because of the lawsuit, they came back and like literally fired me.
He sent him to Japan, and they did the same thing in
Yeah.
Japan, where he would slap a reporter in Japan. It's like, ah, shit. And now my career is going to be known for this.
Right.
So yeah, eventually, also Hogan. We'll talk about the Hogan Richard Belzer thing real quick,
Yes, yeah.
because
So, I mean, if you watch, he like literally is holding him, and then you just see Richard do this and go limp.
yeah,
Because he literally put him in a headlock for real.
because
When you
Richard
put someone in
Belzer,
a headlock for real, literally it cuts off the blood flow to your, to your brain, and then you like just pass out.
Richard Belzer was treating wrestling kind of like that's fake, whatever. Hey, can you give me a hold, like flippantly, and just like, oh yeah, sure, brother. And he put him in a front headlock and squeezed for real, and he just let him go, and he's like. He flopped over and banged his top back of his head against the wall, and not the wall, but the floor. And he
Mm-hmm.
got back when he woke up and got back up. He was legitimately like bleeding all down his on his back of his neck and stuff. And he's like, "Oh, I'll be right back," walked away. He was bleeding. It was real. And then he sued Hogan, Vince, and the World
Hogan and
Wrestling
Vince,
Federation,
yeah.
and he
I don't
settled out of court
remember.
eventually,
Yeah, I mean,
according to the
obviously Hogan
documentary.
didn't get fired for that, but
No,
unfortunately, Dr. D was not so lucky. Of course, he wasn't Hogan. He
no, he
wasn't
wasn't
Vince's
Hogan.
boy.
But Hogan would admit that, oh, Vince was furious with me, brother, when I saw him the next time after what happened. It was like, yeah, you probably cost him millions of dollars in that lawsuit.
Yeah.
So it's like, so Vince was pissed, but of course he didn't fire Hogan because that was his golden boy. But he was pissed. It was like
Yeah, he was very upset. And like I
so
said, I
yeah,
had to basically explain it to my boss.
yeah,
The stuff that they didn't talk
yeah.
about,
They
I had to
didn't get
explain
into
it
a
to my
lot of it.
boss.
So it's Hogan's a hoe for telling on Jesse, which was the whole unionization thing before WrestleMania 2.
Right, that will be coming up
Which,
in episode 2, and I
yeah,
agree. I didn't like the fact that and the only way Jesse found out, because Jesse didn't know who stooged him. The only way
yeah,
he found out is when he actually was put on. He was suing Vince, and
he
Vince
was
went on
suing
the stand
Vince.
and said, "Hogan told me. Hogan
Yeah,
came to me."
it wasn't on the stand. It was at a deposition. Like Vince,
Oh,
Jesse
deposition.
deposed. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
I'm
deposed
sorry.
Vince, and he went to his lawyer. Is like, can you ask Vince about the unionization thing that I do in '85 and who stooged on me, who told on me? Because I'm
Mm-hmm.
curious. And his lawyer, oh yeah, sure, I can ask. I can ask him anything. So it's like, okay, well, Vince, 1985 unionization effort. Jesse tried to do that, or not? He asked him who. As yet, no, the exact question was, if did anybody ever try to unionize on you, Vince? It's like, oh yeah, Jesse spouted about a union once or twice. What
Mm-hmm.
happened with that? Well, Hulk Hogan told me, so and I squashed that. And
Right,
Jesse
and
was
then he
so
fired
shocked that,
Jesse.
yeah,
He fired Jesse, and Jesse went off and did Predator and stuff.
mm-hmm,
The only reason why they would bring him back is literally because NBC said,
mm-hmm.
Jesse or nothing. We ain't giving you Saturday night's main
Dick,
event unless you have Jesse here.
it was Dick Ebersol, the president of
Yep.
NBC Sports at the time, was like, hey, if you
Mm-hmm.
don't have Jesse, then we're not going to do Saturday night's main event. And Vince, oh
Right.
fucking hell. He had to humble himself and call Jesse. He's like, hey, can you come back? We'll give you more money or whatever. Just come back and do Saturday night's main event with me. So he's like,
Right.
okay. He's like, okay. Well, at the time, he assigned to The Running Man, which is another great movie
Mm-hmm.
from the 80s, too, which I love that movie. But he had signed to The Running
I
Man.
haven't seen it all the way through. I got to see it all the way through.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay.
All right,
So
let's go
that's
to
pretty
Rumble because
much
I think
it.
that's about it.
Yeah, that's about it for episode 1. So let's see. Let me just cut off. The link is in the chat if you want to go watch it on Rumble. We'll be playing wrestling clips, and we'll be probably playing clips from the documentary.
Me too, Tony. Me too.
So yeah, look forward to that. So just give me a
So
couple
catch us
minutes
over on
here.
Rumble. Go, 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 go.
Just give
Alex
us
is
a
not
couple
saying
of
anything. He's just silent.
I'm waiting.
Yeah,
I'm
see.
waiting till you guys bring up, till we talk about the old wrestling stuff. That.
Yeah.
Oh.
I figured that's what he was doing, but let's see. Just bear with me 1 second while I cut this off.
No, I'm not. Just kidding.
Like I said, how about the Pirates, eh?
Again, I don't care.
Come on, you know I'm gonna pick on you. I said it last night in chat. I said I will laugh at you if the Pirates